Hi, everyone. This is Johan Egnell from Mitigram. I think it's time for us to get going. With me today, I have Shankar. Shankar, you have 25 years of experience across banks here in South Asia and Southeast Asia, working from in banks such as Bank of America and Stanchart. And you started out in Mumbai, but then ended up in Singapore, where you have been for at least a couple of years. Would you mind introducing yourself and add the most important things that I missed this?
Yes, and thank you, Johan. And welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in your countries. Firstly, I'm hoping all of you are safe. My name, as Johan said, is Shankar. I've been in the financial service industry for actually close to 30 years now, Johan. So 25 makes me look young. I'm a little older than that. And I've been largely part of the correspondent banking industry, covering both trade and payments in the financial services business. As you mentioned, with Standard Chartered and earlier with Bank of America, I also spent a couple of years with Western Union after that, covering payments for Asia. So that's me.
Thank you very much, Shankar. I expect you to be able to answer the questions I have. I have been with Mitigram now for 5 years, and I relocated with my family a couple of months ago down here to Asia and to Singapore to make sure we continue to grow in the region. For those who don't know, Mitigram is a platform where corporates and banks connect with regards to trade finance needs. It's the world's largest marketplace for trade finance, and we have a lot to bring to Asian corporates and banks. However, today's call will not be about Mitigram. It will be about the state of trade in Asia. Panelists, I think that at the bottom of this webinar, there's a menu bar, and there should be something that says Q&A. Feel free to ask questions and interact with us. We're more than happy to answer your questions. I will look for these questions throughout the call, and if there's something affecting or touching what we're speaking about, I will bring them up immediately. Otherwise, I will bring them up at the end of the call. First of all, Shankar, you said you have been doing this for more than 25 years, almost 30 years. You were around for the 97 Asian financial crisis, 9/11, SARS, the Lehman Brothers. How does this crisis compare to the other crises we've had in the last 25, 30 years, in your opinion?
That's a very interesting question, Johan. The way I look at it, this crisis is very different simply because it's largely nature that's come in the form of the pandemic, right? We did see something similar in Asia around the SARS time. I wasn't there in Singapore at that time, but I know that was also fairly impactful in the region. I remember my friends over here telling me that it was not very good, especially in these parts of the world. But it's, the difference really is, I would like to believe that the Asian crisis, the 2009 crisis was largely something that we bought on ourselves. Well, this is largely driven by nature and what's around us. And potentially that could well be why the impact of this, while harsh, if we find obviously cures, etc., could go away faster, simply because we didn't bring this on ourselves. It just came because of nature.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion whether there's a U-shaped return to expect, or a V-shaped. I guess we're all hoping for the V-shape. And like you said, given that it's brought to us by nature and there's no underlying fundamental crisis in the market, hopefully it will be V-shaped. I think there's a lot of discussions on how we're faring, really. What is happening to the market, to the industry? Are we seeing a rebound already or not? But I know you have looked at the data. What does the data show us? What has happened and what to perhaps expect as well?
So Johan, I'll begin with what we have seen. And data unfortunately has got what I call a hindsight. What's happened in the past view, right? what happened in February, March, and April, and even May for that matter. And obviously, there is forward-looking views that people have expressed. Let me begin with what I see as, or what I sort of read through the data that's come in recently on the months of April and so on. I'll share a screen and show you what I saw there. Perhaps that will help you sort of get a sense of where this is. Um, if you think about it, those months of February, March, April were very, very tough, and they were tough on almost all countries in Asia, beginning with China, and then moving on to other markets, including Singapore, where I am. I'm not sure how clearly you can see this Swift data, and I have to acknowledge Swift, which is which puts out this data every month. They've come up only till April. I'm waiting for the May data to come in anytime now. But if you look at this data, and I've highlighted or tried to highlight what I want to particularly showcase, trade year on year by volume, not by value, by volume, fell about 16% globally, not just in Asia. And that potentially showcases what really happened in the market at this time. Trade falling by 15% by volume and substantially more by value because oil prices came down. As some of you will remember, there was a time when U.S. oil was going negative because people would not take delivery. And when I got up that, I think it was a Wednesday or a Thursday morning, it was like, really, what happened? Why were people so desperate to get rid of oil, and why was there no bias? Simply because everything was looking very bleak at that point in time. And this data shows that. And this is April data. If I showed you March data, it would be similar, and potentially May data would start to show some recovery. But I think June would be the best data to look at from our perspective.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see that. From what you have heard in the market, then among your peers and friends, what is the sentiment? Do you have anyone? Because I mean, often the gut feeling tells where things are going at the before the data is given the hindsight you were talking about the data. Have you heard anything?
And that, Johan, that's spot on. I spoke to a trader who works in these markets, and he told me, when I asked him this question last week, he said, Shankar, my problem now is not people not buying my goods. My problem right now is the bottlenecks that are there in ports. Having to navigate, internal country regulations. Can goods move? Things like that. And so I asked him. I said, "So you're not worried about sales at this time?" He said, "Frankly, no. That's going very well for us." I thought it was, he was obviously trying to stay positive. So I tried to query that with a freight forwarder, a listed company in a market that I cover. And this gentleman told me, he said, Shankar, my challenge is really making sure that the truckers are there to carry the goods from the ports and they get the approvals and so on. I said, so you're not seeing a slowdown? He said, no, obviously we've seen a slowdown, but we are seeing a spike back. And our challenge is that the apparatus or the government apparatus and other things that slowed down in this pandemic are coming back, but they're taking obviously a little bit of time. The freight forwarder actually had a very interesting story to tell me. He said his challenge now was relating to clearing goods in customs and making sure that he can find a way to have things delivered out, as opposed to shipping, as opposed to even people buying. And I take that very, very positively. Now let me make sure that I don't overstate this. Clearly, data and the data that you will see shows that there is growth, but it is still some growth that needs to come through in the coming days. I saw an interesting data, Johan, around China, which might speak to this this is as of April. I think the May data has also come out, but I wasn't able to get my hands onto it. But if you allow me, I will show the data of China imports and exports as of April, and that potentially showcases what I'm talking about from a business from a business perspective. Let me see if I can get that data up to you. Um,
Yeah, because if continue on China, the whole world was when China shut down first in February, the whole world was affected. Things, the supply chain of everyone sort of went chaotic. Things didn't leave China. I think that's relating to what you're speaking to. And looking at if we look at these numbers, but if I can then follow up with a question, given that the sort of how that disturbed the supply chain of the whole world, there was a discussion on people moving away from China as they wanted to diversify their supply chain. They were too reliant on China. Do you think that will happen? Will this move away? The supply chain will move away from Asia into perhaps more in more Africa or Latin?
I do see change coming through, Johan,
Yeah.
and this is for many reasons. One of the reasons why we will see change is because of for example, medical supplies. When the US started to figure out that their masks were no longer being made in the US, or at least a large part was not made in the US, that troubled them. When India started to find that some of their medical supplies had to come from China and the supply chains were broken, that troubled them. I see global supply chains starting to potentially, at least for the essential goods, veer back to their country. That might not be a good thing from a scale and the other perspectives, but I see that definitely on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
However, building any of this is not going to be easy, Johan. I mean, this is effort that countries have taken a long time to put together. So I see, while I see that shift happening, I do see that shift happening gradually, as opposed to, a turnkey that happens as we speak. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that is also related to the fact that China, as a country in itself, is growing. Their role in the supply chain is changing. They will do more demand than supply that they've done in the past. It will shift. From your experience within the banks and what you're hearing, how are they reacting to this? And is there a different approach between different banks? I guess some might be more risk averse. Is there someone who sees this as an opportunity? And can this be leveraged by corporates out there, you think?
So, great question, Johan. I joined Standard Chartered in '09, and anyone who's followed a financial crisis will know that the '09 phase was not the best phase for most banks, especially in markets like the US and potentially Europe, because of the challenges that was there. That was obviously man-made. However, banks such as Standard Chartered at that stage saw that as an opportunity to ramp up trade business in a big way. So I was following up that conversation with a couple of my friends who are in the industry, who we work together with, and we were narrating that episode. The feedback that I got were clearly, and I think you said it very correctly, there are going to be two kinds of banks. There are going to be the banks that are risk averse, perhaps capital challenged, and I'm not saying this negatively, but it's just that they're going to be more careful how they use capital. And then there are going to be banks which will say, you know what, this is the opportunity I have to build the fastest as the fastest way I can build trade assets, which is the trade assets. Trade assets typically are 180 days at best. They're typically self-liquidating, and from a Basel perspective, they've people have showcased that as potentially being the least risky. Now, that doesn't mean there's no risk, but people have seen that in the past, and I see banks starting to uh, look at trade finance positively and potentially use every aspect of trade finance, including the Mitigram platform, to originate trade. Because what they want is engines that can help them, grow the trade assets, and platforms that can potentially help with that, along with their own people. So they have got their own teams, of course, in countries, etc. But not every bank is in every country, and so they will end up using other sources such as Mitigram to grow trade assets. And I see tremendous potential for banks once they regroup themselves, especially in this region, which is largely based, export based on trade, like MT700s, etc. I see opportunity for banks coming back over here from my experience before.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and we have seen that on the Mitigram platform as well. Corporates looking wider, finding new banks, and banks being interested in using Mitigram to find assets to buy in the market. I have a question from the audience here. How effective has the government interventions been in navigating the crisis? Do you think that needs to be more, and from whom and in what way? And let me start there. I saw a graph highlighting the differences in subsidies and fiscal support in the COVID crisis compared to the 2009 crisis. It's a completely different ballgame. Countries now, they are pushing out 50% of a GDP into the society. While during the 2009 crisis or in 2008, there was 10% of the GDP was as intervention. So there's a huge amount of money being poured into the market by the governments all over the world. Is that enough, or do we need to see more? Thank you for the question.
Johan, my answer to that is, we will always be critical of our government simply because we expect more from them. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We should expect more from our governments. But the way I've seen governments react, and after, there's obviously been some period of chaos when people were trying to figure out what all this was. But post that, I've seen governments come together in a way which has helped uh, or tried to help people, industry, individuals, and find a way to address growth coming back into some of these markets. Let me take you to an example. Someone I know called me the other day and said, "You know what? I found $1,200 in my account, and this person is in the US." I said, "Why?" So she said, "I don't know. I just got it." I said, "What are you going to do with that money?" She said, "I'm going to shop." And that's a perfect example of how governments expect the economy to start growing or coming back again, right? It's like in the old days, Johan, I used to have a scooter, which occasionally would not start because there was no electronic starter to it. So I had to run and push it. And sometimes I'd get some people to push the scooter from behind while I was on it and then put it on gear to get it started. To me, this is the kind of analogy that I want to relate back over here. Governments are trying very hard to get economies started because they believe if the economy gets started, money tends to circulate, and if money circulates, the industry will come back, and if industry comes back, banks will come back, and everyone else as part of the ecosystem will come back. I see effort around that. And yes, you can be critical. You can say someone is doing more, someone is doing less. Someone has done extremely well, and someone is not. And I'm sure there would be a scorecard coming out. But I don't think there's one government that is not focused around ensuring that they bring back industry. Even, for example, in Singapore, where I've seen the government, reacting fairly quickly, fairly swiftly. We've seen what's happened in the US. We've seen what's happened in the UK, as an example, in Europe. The kind of money that the government is willing to commit has been substantial, and I'm very, very comfortable that they are trying to do the best that they can. The economy will take time. I don't think this is going to be an overnight switch. I was listening to Chairman Powell, I think day before, or was it yesterday, where he was answering questions, and he said they are surprised by the way retail has been growing in the US. And I'm using US as an example. I'm waiting for Singapore to open tomorrow. When Johan, I'm hoping that you and I can go and shop for all the things that we've not shopped all these days. I think it's going to make a huge difference. My belief is the governments are trying very, very hard. And yes, there will be some scorecarding, and someone will say someone stood out and someone didn't. I'm very, very positive that governments are very keen to get this going.
Yeah, and I think the governments are just hoping for this will be a small hiccup. We will continue to pick up where we left off in February or January, depending on where you're based. But we are speaking about long-term effects as well. There has been a lot of talk about the working from home, We see stocks belonging to sort of webinar tools soaring. Those kind of shifts have been accelerated. They will happen. What about here in Southeast Asia and Asia in general? Are there certain industries that where there will be long-term effects? I mean, we've seen some of the oil traders go down, which has affected, especially here in Singapore, it's big on the news. How will they be affected? And are there other industries you see? I mean, the airlines, will they ever recover, for example?
So, and I wish I could answer that with any amount of certainty. But you're right. The oil traders in markets like Singapore have been impacted, and we've seen that impact. Virtually every week, there's a new company that's been challenged for one reason or the other. And these are exceptionally good companies who've been around for many years. One company I read was here from 1970. That makes them, give or take, about 50 years old. These are not companies that have been set up on a whim. These are companies that have been set up over a long period in time. I see obviously some of those companies coming back, but they would be challenged. Airlines is another ball game, and the case in point I will bring is someone like Singapore Airlines, great airline, and the Singapore government stood by them by bailing them out very quickly. One is watching to see how they recover because they are a premium airline, and how they come back would be interesting. But everyone, whether it's a Lufthansa, whether it's a British Airways, whether it is the Thai Airways, which I think or one of them which announced bankruptcy recently, all these airlines are suffering. I don't personally see the airline industry recovering back that quickly, simply because people will be scared to take transport, at least for some time. There'll be a few of us who would be brave enough to sit on a plane and say, let's take it. And there'll be some others who say, we'll wait for a bit before things settle. And this fear of a second wave, etc., has to settle down before people get more comfortable with that. The airline stocks, the hotel industry, etc., are impacted at this stage, Johan. And I think that challenge will continue for a bit more.
Yeah, I have another question from the audience here. It says that regardless of what you're saying, so that referring to us, some industries are suffering, and we see an increased risk of default among our clients. How long do you think this uncertainty will remain? And I'm adding to this: is there something they can do about this to sort of mitigate the risk?
Yeah. So, and that's a great question, by the way. Again, I keep caveating what I'm saying, but with the fact that the pandemic is real. People have been impacted. People have been affected. But the way I see it, in the similar way that I look at data, I look at data as two kinds. One is backward looking, which is the kind of data I showed you, which showcases what happened in April and May and Jan and Feb and so on. And then forward looking data. Industries will get impacted. There is no doubt about it. But there will also be others who will come and take their place. And strength will be in companies which are focused around what they are doing. Case in point is all the companies that have raised money in the US markets over the last, I'd say 3 or 4 months. There were some bond issuances which were substantial, and there were industries that will not come back potentially for some time, whether it is people in the industry which offers cruises, the cruise liners. Yeah. It will take some time. That said, I wanted to showcase what I saw was an ADB data around forward-looking, something that sort of forecasts where we will be. And if you permit me, I'll try and show that to you now.
Yeah.
That data actually showcases the question that you have very, very well. It shows you, no, this is the one. So this is the one that ADB has projected. And I want to showcase what their 2020 forecast is going to be, which is that Asia will grow 2.2% versus 5.2 in 2019 versus 5.9 in 2018. But look at what their projection for 2021 is. For 2021, they are projecting a 6.2% growth in developing Asia. This is ADB. This is not me saying this. And I take comfort in the fact that an organization that such as ADB, which has got, I think, 68 constituents across the world, but largely in Asia, putting out numbers which are so compelling. Uh, Even if I take it with a pinch of salt, if I say this is not going to be 6.2, maybe the folks in ADB don't know what they're saying. I would never say that, but let's say I did. Let's say it was 5%. Even 5% as compared to where we are in 2020
Right.
compares very, very well. And this is where I think the world will go. And again, I quote Chairman Powell in his speech to the Senate. He said the same thing. He said he sees growth coming back, but then there will be some amount of muted time that this takes before it comes back, and that's fair. People have to regroup. People have to, it's like I said, you have to. It will take time, but that time is starting. It's John. I don't know if you took train rides when you were small. I did, and I remember a train ride that we would take from my home city of Pune to Mumbai, or Bombay as it was called then. There were, I think, 24 tunnels on the way, and I would put my head out of the window to see what it looked like when you entered a tunnel and when you got out of it. When you entered a tunnel, it was scary because everything suddenly got very dark. Okay, and the longest tunnel, it was dark for quite a period of time. And then guess what? Suddenly you start seeing light at the end of the tunnel, as they say. But I would see that figure really, and I could see that light coming closer and closer. That's where I think we are at this stage. I think we will get better. I think it'll get more positive. You know why? Because human spirit can never be kept leased for a long period in time. And we
Yeah.
are starting to see that. Yes, there will be fear. Yes, there will be care that we all need to take. Yes, there will be hiccups on the way, but I think it is upwards from here as opposed to downwards.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you mentioned it. We're looking forward to the reopening of the economy. We're ready to go out there and uh, just spend money. So hopefully this will be quick. We have a question again. It says that COVID-19 has brought down a lot of small businesses, leaving mostly large corporates capable of pulling through in the market. What are our thoughts on this, in terms of competition and on trade and the economy? And if I get to start, there's this crisis has had a huge impact on many lives. When you go with a taxi here in Singapore, you hear stories of 1 to 2 rides per day. Hotels are being shut down. It's affecting a lot of people. But there's also the point that the industries that have been affected, they will quickly pick up again. They are not producing capital goods. They are in the service industry. So there might be, and there has been discussion as well that we're protecting the large corporate too much. The SMEs, they don't get to see any funding. It's too hard to apply for money. Hopefully, my take on it is hopefully they will rebound quickly in a way that large corporates cannot do simply because of their size. And I think that we speak about ADB, Asia Development Bank. They like to speak, or everyone refers to them as the $1.5 trillion trade gap. The SMEs don't get access to funding. And it's important that we make sure the SMEs come back quickly. And that's where the government spending comes in, so that people are ready to support them again as soon as this opens up. Do you have a different view on how we should treat the SMEs, or how we have treated them for the past few months?
Look, SMEs have suffered, Johan. And your example of our favorite taxi drivers in Singapore is a case in point. I see huge lines outside shopping malls and no one coming out of them.
Yeah.
It's small industries that have suffered simply because they don't have that, the staying power or the muscle, as you would call it in the industry, uh, around a sustained period in time. But there are also cases of companies starting to come to rescue. And I was listening to a large multinational talking about how they were helping farmers in a market that they were, I think this was in India, where they continued to buy the milk produced every day through the pandemic, though they didn't need it. So they had to find ways to deploy it. And there are many such cases. But I think the stark reality is that small industry, small businesses have been impacted, and they will take time to come back. And government assistance to get them back, whether it was in the form of grants, or in the form of, I was reading an article which said the government in India is now saying they will delay recognizing bad loans for 6 months or something like
Mhm.
that, simply because that will allow for companies to get themselves together and come back. I think some of those are clearly are approaches that governments will take, should take, and are taking. I know we can always be critical of government, but when I look at Singapore, when I look at other markets around us, to the best of their ability, they have done this. Yes, this is not going to solve overnight. I wish it was a V-shaped recovery. I don't think anyone is going to be, uh, betting on that at this stage. Though I did see a Morgan Stanley article yesterday which doubled down and said V-shaped. I read it 3 times just to make sure I understood it. But they were saying that by Jan of next year, you should actually see growth coming back for all
Yeah.
the reasons that I mentioned, which is that this was not man-made, this was nature, and the economies were humming very well till that point in time.
Yeah, but I guess that's also what makes this difficult to project, that it's not man-made. This is nothing we can control really until we have a vaccine, and um, most people are guessing so far on where and what the spread will look like in a couple of months. So um, that being said, um, there's no point in us really to guess on what will happen in the next few months. You and me, we are neither doctors, and we don't sit on the data that ADB has. Any sort of final remarks on what you think still is what will be the deciding factor on if growth continues? Is it the vaccine, or is it, like you said, people go out and spend their money? What would be the deciding factor in your mind?
Uh, in my mind, it's going to be all of that. But you can't wait for one versus the other, Johan. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, look, and I speak to people in markets which have been cooped up for 60 days, 90 days. They've not moved out of their home. Um, People are now either comfortable with the fact that they need to keep their faces covered, their hands washed, and take precautions, whether it's a 1 meter rule, etc., but go about their business. It's going to be hard in certain markets. But you are starting to see industry come back. And yes, there are some results which are not very good on the back of that. So potentially the vaccine might help, or medication that will help cure this will come through. Every day I read a new press article saying some old medication has suddenly proved of new value. Uh, Again, I just don't know enough about medical science to opine on it, but I don't think, last count I heard there were 120 companies working on a vaccine. 120, Johan, is a lot of companies putting a lot
Yeah.
of money, a lot of minds, a lot of knowledge, a lot of intelligence, a lot of smart people working on it. And when that happens, I think there's always a result that will come in. Whether it's a vaccine, whether it is something else that happens, we will deal with it. I just think that we are now approaching that light at the end of the tunnel. It
Yeah.
was still some distance away. I don't think there's going to be sunshine robustly coming out, but I think we will start seeing the light, and hopefully we will get out of this. And if Morgan Stanley is to be believed, and Chairman Powell is to be believed, and ADB is to be believed, then the next year focus will be very, very different. When we do this call next year in June, we'll be very happy with the situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and I think it's time for us to round off there. But I want to add to the positive sentiment, and that is that we see on the Mitigram platform, a platform where, for those who don't know, is an online platform where corporates reach out to their banks and ask for confirmation of LC, for example, discounting of receivables. We saw quite a big decline in March, but then we saw the numbers pick up again. And these are large exporters, and I see it definitely as a sign that the supply chains are working. There are sales going on across the world. People are optimistic. Otherwise, they wouldn't buy these capital goods that are being negotiated on our platform, and they wouldn't buy the commodities that are being negotiated. So I hope ADB is right. I hope Morgan Stanley is right. Let's all take care of each other. Let's not spread this too much, this virus in our societies, and let's hope for a quick return back to normal. Any closing words from you as well, Shankar?
Yes. The only thing I'll say is continue to wear your face masks and
Yeah.
please wash your hands. Use disinfectant or sanitizers wherever you get them. Be careful, and be cautious, but start to venture out. This is what I advise myself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Shankar. I take those from a wise man who's been around for a while. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you everyone for listening in. I can see on the attendees that we have quite a few from the industry, from the large manufacturers and from banks, but also some from the academia, which is nice. Maybe there's a slight chance we actually impacted someone, a young student, a future leader, Shankar. Who knows? Anyway.
There seems to be one last question from the audience.
Yes. What are the opportunities you see around recently? I guess you can interpret that the way you want, Shankar. Opportunities in terms of business.
Simply, I wish I could be prescriptive. I'll tell you, optimism comes from within yourself, and you will see it. I don't know where you're based there, but if you're based in Singapore, when you venture out tomorrow, or day after, or whenever, obviously with all the precautions that the government mandates, you will start to see that optimism come out. Every day I look out of my window and I see a bus. It's a 75 number. In the month of February and March, there was no one in that bus. No one. Okay. Now, when I look at that bus, it's starting to fill up. To me, that is optimism coming back. That is people starting to venture out. That is people starting to spend money. That is people starting to get gainfully employed. And I'm hoping with that, all of us will come out of this, fairly quickly. It's now just a matter of time. It's no longer if, it's when. And I think we are on that track as we speak. So with that, Johan, unless you have anything else, thank you very much.
No, thank you for the positive outlook and for the positive spirit, Shankar. I see that quite a few who joined in the middle of the call and even now. We've been recording this. Hopefully, that it will be made available if I press the right button. We'll make this available either on our website or on our LinkedIn page. So please keep your eyes open, and should you have any follow-up questions, let us know. You can reach us at info@mitigram.com, support@mitigram.com, but also at johan.egnell@mitigram.com. And I can forward any questions to Shankar as well. Thank you very much, everyone who joined, and thank you, Shankar.
Thank you, Johan. Thanks, everyone.